Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Silicon video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with an update concerning the Navi PCB that I analysed just yesterday. In case you missed it, I will link yesterday's video. But the PCB could well be an engineering sample board, and we have space there for 8 GDDR6 memory modules as well as 2 8-pin power connectors. Once again, it is most likely an engineering sample board, so things such as power requirements could be very different in retail configurations. For example, we might only see one 8-pin power connector or one 6-pin power connector or some variant thereof. A number of people were asking my opinions of the actual die size of Navi, and if we were to compare that to the RTX 2080. So what I did is I went into Photoshops and I took the Navi bare PCB image and also a RTX 2080 with all of the cooler removed and all that stuff. So what essentially we have is just the Turing die as well as the GDDR6 memory and other bits and bobs fully exposed. Then what I did is I jumped the GDDR6 memory module as well as the Turing die to different layers, and then I basically resized it so that the DRAM, the GDDR6 memory module, would fit perfectly on the Navi board. And yeah, so what you can see on screen is that the Turing die, with the same resizing of the GDDR6 memory module, it's just smaller than the space where the Navi die, presumably, we don't know it's Navi, it could be some completely different GPU for all we know, or it could be a fake board. It's way bigger, the space. So there's a couple of theories you could have. The first is this is a fake board. The second is that this is a higher end SKU, perhaps for example for the data center. You might recall that one of my sources did mention that we would be seeing the Pro variants of Navi launch at some point this year. I believe a source said it was something like the third quarter that was going to happen, or maybe the fourth quarter. As I said, it's been a couple of months now since I covered that. But either way, it's possible it's a Pro variant. It's also possible that this is an engineering sample board, but for Navi 20, which is, as we know, going to be a much larger die. But either way, I find it very interesting what we have here. The other possibility is that we are looking at a multi-chip module type of configuration for Navi 10. The only reason that I'm somewhat opposed to this is that AMD have basically commented that so far they're not actually ready to do that. Raja Koduri mentioned it, and I believe David Wang as well hinted that for now the consumer level boards are not ready for, AMD are not ready to make MCM versions of Navi, but obviously things could change, or it's possible they simply misfed us information so that we weren't able to catch on to their plans. Now let's move over to the Ryzen 3000 series, because well, there's a really interesting update concerning the Ryzen 3000 series CPUs along with the next generation chipsets from the company. So a Chinese website, Bailey, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, so I really apologize. So if someone can comment down below exactly how to pronounce that, I would appreciate it. But they have sources that have actually given them some insight into currently what the engineering sample CPUs are looking like from AMD. And it's really interesting because this information really tallies up to what a couple of my sources have told me, although this information is more updated. I have reached out to my sources though to see if I can have any update or clarification to some of these points. So the first thing is that the engineering sample CPUs are putting out an average of around 15% IPC compared to the previous generation Ryzen. That's great, and that basically tallies up very nicely to what multiple reports have told us concerning AMD's targets for Zen 2, and it's really good. It basically puts them slightly better in some cases than Skylake, we can presume, although of course workloads will vary on how much of a performance increase we can expect compared to, let's say, the previous generation Zen. Furthermore, we have some clock speed information. Apparently, the CPUs at the moment are running up to 4.5 gigahertz, although it is stressed that this is not final silicon, but it is getting quite close to final silicon. According to another report, it's actually it's a quad-core CPU that they're using. And this also tallies up to what I was told by a source within AMD. You might recall that there was that leak concerning the quad-core CPU that we saw like a couple of months ago, a month ago, something like that. And people were really puzzled of like, why are we seeing a quad-core CPU? And it was just a bit weird. Well, apparently that was quite early engineering sample silicon, a quad-core CPU that was being provided to motherboard manufacturers just to make sure that the board didn't pretty much explode when they put the CPU in, right? Because it's like, is the board even recognize it? Is there any errors with like a GASI code and so on? Like what things need to change? Do they need to adjust anything on the actual board itself? Is PCIE running correctly? And so on and so on. So that was one of the concerns. So it looks like at the very least, the chips that manufacturers such as Gigabyte, such as MSI and Asus and so on currently have access to are quad-core chips. I'm uncertain if they have access to higher core count chips, let's say like an 8-core CPU or a 12-core CPU, or whether those are just within AMD's own headquarters right now. Another thing that we learn is that there are 40 PCIe channels on the board. However, they are split up between various functions, with a lot of them being gobbled up with USB, as you can see on screen. According to the website, though, that are reporting this, motherboard manufacturers have said that so far anyway, the 3rd generation Ryzen, which is once again based on Zen 2, is not quite meeting the expectations that they and perhaps we have of the chips. Furthermore, they have said that the lower end motherboards, for example the B550s, may not have PCIe 4. And this is to do with multiple reasons, but it is something that they are currently testing. Also, as a small aside, although I don't think it's going to affect that many of you, folks with an A320 series board will not, I repeat, not be able to plonk in a Zen 2 based chip into that board. And it's probably multiple reasons. Mainly, if I had to guess, it could be things to do with the power on the board. It might be that they just don't feel like the VRM design is up to task. Plus, a lot of those boards had smaller BIOS chip sizes, so it might be that they just didn't feel like they could update the board and then be able to support the Ryzen 3000 series as well. But the website itself are saying that they believe, and their source believes, it could be, quote, a sales strategy by AMD to help push new motherboard sales. And I don't know. We'll just have to wait. So the website hwbench.com are listing a Ryzen 7 3700X and pitting it against an i7 8700K. They are reporting the 3700X has 12 cores, 24 threads. That makes sense to me. Versus the i7 8700K, which, as we all know, has 6 cores, 12 threads. They've got all the cache information here. And yeah, okay. That plus the instructions have not been officially confirmed by AMD. The frequencies we're seeing is a base frequency of 4200 MHz with a turbo clock frequency of 5000 MHz. But in my opinion anyway, and I'm just saying this because it's already doing the rounds on Twitter, I'm almost positive that these results are totally fake. For one reason, if you were to look at the single thread performance of the 3700X, they're scoring around 5500 points. But if you go to the same website and look at the Ryzen 7 2700X versus the same i7 8700K, although it doesn't matter because we're only looking at the 2700X's results, the results here are around 4785 for the single thread performance. So if you actually take that number and then add 15% to it, which is the IPC gains supposedly for the 2nd generation Ryzen, we actually have 5502 points. So I personally believe what they've done is just take the single thread performance of the 2700X and then add 15%. So what's my opinion thus far of the Ryzen 3000 series chips? Well, assuming these reports are the worst case scenario. So let's do, just for the sake of this video for a second, assume that we see 4500 or 4600 megahertz for the, the Ryzen 7 3700X. It's really going to come down to the pricing as well. I'm going to be very interested to see what AMD's strategy, particularly when it comes to pricing. I really want to know what they're going to charge for an 8-core chip for the Matisse series of CPUs. I want to know if they're going to be extremely aggressive, or because of the price currently of, let's say, the 9900K, decide ka-ching and, well, cash in. So, I mean, the worst possible scenario for us as customers would be, let's say, the 8-core Zen 2 chip ends up being like $300, and then they have a higher end 12-core chip, which would be like, $500. I'm hoping that those prices are not what we see for retail, but of course, we could only wait because, well, things can change, right? With all of that said though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Normal stuff if you did. Like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.